Hello, lovely dance people, and welcome to David's Dance Podcast. I'm your host, David Evans. We have an amazing, talented dancer here with us on the podcast. He does an amazing kind of blend of his backgrounds in contemporary dance as well as street styles like popping, locking, and house. And being kind of a fusion dancer myself, I really love that and enjoy seeing that in other dancers, seeing those kind of hybrids. He's currently working with Rosie K Dance Company, which is a Birmingham institution practically. And she creates work that is very physical and community driven, focused on storytelling, dance theater. And he's in her new work, Romeo and Juliet, which is very exciting, and we're very excited to talk about. And he creates his own work, and based in Bristol, orientated around themes of identity and community. We're so blessed to have him here on the podcast with us today. Deepraj Singh. Deepraj, welcome.
Hello. Well, thank you. I don't know. I wanted to try and make my hello as sultry as the first hello that I had when I entered the Zoom call.
A hello that sounds like whiskey and coffee and cigars and smoke through a room. Hello.
Just to give that perfect ASMR treatment to the podcast,
Exactly.
No, thank you for having me. This is great. I've kind of listened to some of your other podcasts and some of the other sessions that you've ran and
Oh, thanks, man.
yeah, I think it's such a great thing as well, like talking about dance. And I think, you talked about it in your email a little bit that you sent me, of like with the initial kind of like thoughts and questions and trying to demystify that whole thing of what is the process and what are the routes that different dancers take, and what is it like being a professional dancer. I think is so important because it's something that I like to focus on as well, especially when it comes to accessibility, and making dance as accessible as possible.
Yeah, because if you think about your career, do you
Mm.
think your career would have necessarily, could you have mapped your career like exactly how it's gone, or has it
Oh,
been a surprise for you?
oh, it's totally been a surprise.
Yeah.
I think we touched upon it in the beginning in our initial chat, but like the job that I got with Gary Clark, my first kind of big professional gig with the Troth, which was organized by Academy, which is a South Asian company based in London, South Asian dance company. Um, it was so interesting. I literally got an email about the audition on a Monday. And it was sent to me by someone, Katie Noakes, who's based here in Bristol. She's an amazing, like, artistic producer. She produces so much dance. I think you know Katie Noakes as well, if I
I don't
am
actually.
correct.
I haven't met
You
her yet.
don't? I feel like maybe Ella has worked with Katie quite a
Yeah.
lot, but
Yeah, I might have
um,
met her through possibly, well, seen her on the Bristol scene. It's part of
mm,
Ella's stuff.
yeah, no, definitely. She's just amazing. She's been with me through my whole dance journey, actually.
Really? Wow.
Uh, Before training, during training, after training, and she, Katie Noakes, like I said, she's one that got me this big job because she sent me this email on the Monday, and I was like, oh, it's an audition on Friday in London. Okay, went to the audition on Friday and I got it, and then that was
Wow.
20 half of 2018 and the rest of 2019 where I was touring. So it was
Dude,
just
that's
like
amazing.
it
Wow.
was such a big thing. And like you said, there's no way I could have mapped that. There's no way I
Yeah.
could have seen that coming. Like I was just like, okay, they're looking for dancers of South Asian heritage. I'll go and see what's cracking. And
And you're
yeah.
what's cracking, apparently. You're like, turns out I'm cracking.
Oh my god, yeah. Like in that audition as well, I hadn't auditioned in a really long time as well when I went to that. And I definitely felt the anxiety. I split my toe in the audition. And I was just like, oh, like it was essentially we stopped for a second because we were pausing to like stretch.
Mm.
and I just felt this warm liquid under my left foot, and I was just like, wait, what is? And I looked over, and there was just like a little pool of blood, and I was like, oh no,
Yo.
this is not okay right now. um
So
but
what people don't realize when, like, with dance, with all, all these
yeah.
motivational things, they're like, it takes blood, sweat, and tears. And it's like, you do dance and it's like, yeah, actual blood, actual sweat, and actual tears. Like, it's not like
Yeah.
a pretty Instagram meme. It's just like, yeah, there's gonna be actual
Yeah.
blood, sweat, and tears.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like there is so much work, and it's so funny as well because I think like there's something specific, or like there's something about like watching dance and seeing the work that goes into it
Mm.
that really engages an audience. Um, but also the flip side of that is it's super tiring, like for the dancers to show that work as well as to perform it.
Mm.
Like I know it kind of ekes out naturally, but you know, it's that funny thing of people wanting to almost feel like, or feel what it's like to dance by just watching you dance. um
Yeah.
and that it kind of,
Kinesthetic empathy.
that's the one. That's exactly what I was about to say.
Mm.
There's it wasn't it a study that was done in like Sweden or Norway? Don't quote me on any of this. I'm really bad at quoting information, but I just remember like the essential facts essentially.
Mm.
So anybody listening, don't worry about the countries that I don't know. Just stop.
One of the Nordics.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
always, they're always doing cool stuff.
They've got those experimental kind of
Yeah.
investigations and scientific explorations, but um, essentially they talked about like this phenomenon of kinesthetic empathy and how when people, I think they did like a scan of people's brains as they were, one group were listening to classical music, and the other group were watching a dance. And they noticed that like the parts that fired were kind of like the frontal cortex, where like there's the emotional lobes of the brain, like which control like how you feel and your personality. But they also noticed synapses firing for different body parts as well, as
Mm.
if that person, their brain was telling them to move their body as they were watching this other body dancing and moving through the space, which I thought was just like mind
Wow.
blowing because I get that as well. When I don't know if you've ever
Mm.
had that when you're watching a dance piece and you're so engrossed that your body starts to
You want to,
twitch,
like, start
and
moving with it.
and you're, yeah, and you're like, oh
Yeah.
no, wait, I'm watching, I'm observing, but my body just automatically starts to go with
Yeah.
it.
It's part of the reason why watching someone, like, having teachers that demonstrate techniques is so important,
Mm,
because you will get better at a technique by just watching it being performed correctly.
mm,
Um, because your body does what you're saying, where it maps what you're seeing onto your own body as if it was happening. It's
mm,
simulating it. So
mm,
your brain, even though you're not moving, your brain is practicing the movement through the watching and
mm.
imagining what it feels like. Um,
Yeah.
and so then when you go to do it, it's almost like you've practiced a little bit more by watching
Mm,
somebody do it right.
yeah.
Like, I find that often when I think about, like, breakdancing or like doing it in like a power move, and
Mm,
even without necessarily instruction or input, if I watch a guy do like that power move really well, like,
mm,
I just find that, like, I'm just doing it better,
mm. Yeah.
because I'm seeing it done correctly. That almost like resets my brain with like the right technique going into it, as
Mm,
opposed to, you know, if I'm watching somebody my level, then I'm
yeah.
still re-ingraining that, and it's part of that thing of like surrounding yourself with, people who are better than you are, and
Mm,
you will rise up.
yeah, for sure. Like, and it's kind of like, when you're trying to learn a phrase
Mm,
in like in a piece of choreography, and like one day you just can't, your body just can't organize itself in that way,
yeah.
and you go to sleep and you come back the next day and your body knows. how to do it. It's like
Yeah.
it's just there, and it's so amazing how much our brain is involved in on the back burner, mapping that and understanding it, even when we're not thinking about it.
Mm,
Subconsciously, our brain is just trying to figure out and solve, which is a blessing and can also be a
mm,
curse, I feel like, especially when you're trying to have some downtime. Like I've
yeah.
had it where like my brain is just still thinking about this creative puzzle that's
Yeah.
in my head, and it won't let it go because it
Hmm.
wants to solve it.
Part of it's trusting the body as well. So one of the
Mm,
things that happens, I'm reading a book on sleep at the minute. One of the things that happen is when we sleep, our brain consolidates information, moves it from short-term memory, working memory to long-term memory structures. And
yeah.
those structures are different. Those parts of the brain that it moves it to are different, depending on whether it is sort of like factual kind of knowledge information, or
Mm,
whether it's what we think of as like muscle memory.
mm,
And that's a part in your brain. It's not actually in your muscles, but it's a different part. And in a way, while you sleep, your brain consolidates those movements, and
mm,
it works on them as well. It like
yeah.
problem solves them. And it's
Mm,
the reason why you can do a choreography over and over again, not get it one day, and
mm,
then be like, I'm fed up with this, and then come back the
mm,
next day and do it perfect the first time. And it's
yeah.
because your brain, while you're sleeping, almost pieces the information together and consolidates it in such a way that the
Mm,
movement comes home to roost. Like it
yeah,
settles
yeah.
in the body, and your brain has almost like taken these, because we learn choreography in a disjointed way. All right, here's this
Mm,
A, here's this A, here's this phrase, and you're trying to piece it together. And when you
yeah.
sleep, your brain goes, all right, let's now stitch all of this together.
Yeah,
Um,
for
so
sure.
actually, like having sleeping time is actually a really important part of learning choreography, and
Mm,
only expecting so much out of a day as well.
yeah.
There's
And
only so much learning we can cram into a day.
yeah, and I think you touched upon something really important there that I think I learned maybe, well, I think we all learn it at different points in our career, but that idea of trusting yourself
Mm,
and trusting your body, trusting that it will work out what that movement puzzle is at some point. It might not be right
yeah,
now, but it will come. And it's something that is so empowering actually when you start to actually trust that, my body knows what it is. My
yeah,
brain is the thing that's making me go, oh, actually, I don't have it fully worked out. I don't have it fully, like, can we like give it like 5 minutes, and can we, and in allowing your body to just sift into that and sit with that puzzle
yeah.
is so hard. And I think it comes back to like something that um I kind of mentioned that I wanted to touch upon, like, which is this thing of like therapy
Mm.
and dance. And it's just been so eye-opening for me because I've been doing therapy for about it'll be about a year and a half now.
Do you mean
um
dance therapy, or do you mean other forms of therapy, like sit down and conversational
yeah,
therapy?
kind of sit down and conversational therapy, kind
Mm.
of like psychotherapy.
Yeah,
And I've kind of been doing that for the past year and a half, and it was so beneficial during lockdown for sure. Like
yeah.
it really helped me. But I think it's one of the things that is so interesting is firstly the parallels that you can draw between the lessons that I learn in those therapy sessions,
Mm,
and then also the lessons that I've learned in the dance studio, and
mm.
how, subliminally there's been these amazing kind of tools that I've picked up, but I didn't notice that that was something that
Right.
was there. Like um almost like this, for instance, one of them is like comparison, and like how you view comparison. And I think like there's something in my training quite early on where like my teachers were saying, yes, you're going to compare yourself. It's natural to compare yourself to the other people in the class, but also there's something about not necessarily seeing a person's strength as a weakness in you. You all
Right.
have your own strengths. um and there's and what I've learned through therapy is like categorizing that as healthy and unhealthy comparison. There's
Right.
healthy comparison where you look at someone else, and like you said, you're surrounded by people that are better
Like
than you.
aspirational
So it
comparison.
so it elevates you to want to
Right.
be better because you're like, I see that as a strength in that person. And it's not necessarily that I feel inadequate in myself, but I almost want to aspire towards that.
Mm.
And then there's kind of the more unhealthy comparison where you go, wow, there's a strength in that person. And as you're saying that, you're almost kind of subliminally saying, I also have a weakness in that place.
Mm.
And actually, that doesn't need to be there. You can just notice and acknowledge the strengths in others and be happy with that,
Yeah.
and almost aspire towards that, and work towards it. And I think that that's something that's so interesting and so prevalent, within dance, because we are looking at our own bodies and other people's bodies constantly and analyzing them.
Yeah.
And it's something that I wish I'd learned like a lot earlier, or like learn how to, categorize or name. um, and it's something that I teach now when I'm in teaching improvisation.
Mm.
I kind of talk to my students and say, like, it's important to watch each other, but I know as well, like, it can feel uncomfortable if you feel like you're maybe not performing as well as this person in the class, or this person seems to get this task really easily. But
Mm.
don't necessarily see that as a weakness in yourself. See that as something that you can pick up on. You can take elements of their style, fit it
Right.
into your body, learn how it works and integrates with your style, and then come up with your own version of that.
Mm. Is that
And
what you mean
this,
by categorize and name? What do you mean by that? Is that about like
mm,
being able to say what something is so you can consolidate it? Is that sort of what that is?
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's knowing that, for instance, the terms unhealthy and healthy comparison,
Got it. Yeah.
like those two terms have really helped me go in my head, and I still do it now. you know oh, here's a thought that's come up, that feels like it's more unhealthy comparison. Or
Right.
another time it might come up and I go, oh, that's actually some really healthy comparison there. Like,
Mm.
you're just analyzing what someone's done, and you're not ruminating on the weaknesses or the inadequacies that you may have.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. But it's just something that has been so eye-opening in,
Yeah.
for
Of
instance,
course.
rehearsals, when teaching. um, and there's nothing quite like the transparency that you have with a therapist. And then going into like other interactions and being like, wow, like I can be like transparent here as well. Like, I
Mm.
don't have to hide some of those things or those insecurities that I'm feeling. I can also say, hey, like, do you know what, I'm feeling quite nervous right now, like when I'm teaching a class,
Yeah.
and allow the students to sit with that and be like, it's okay if you're feeling nervous, because I'm feeling it a little bit too.
Yeah.
um, and I think there's something so human and important, um, about that I think the dance industry sometimes misses a little bit.
Yeah. I think it's an emphasis on intrapersonal intelligence.
Mm,
Knowing yourself. I think one of the great things kind of about therapy, is like therapy doesn't fix you, but it helps
mm,
you become more aware of the areas that need fixing.
yeah.
It helps you have a bit more self-awareness, a bit more
Mm,
emotional awareness of where you're at and what's going on, as well as giving you tools to be able to handle those things.
mm,
um yeah, because that was kind of like my after I got married 2 years ago, I
mm,
finally went and did some like a few rounds of therapy,
mm.
and it was actually really hard. Like I went into it actually in a pretty good headspace, and the time that I was actually doing the therapy was quite miserable because you're kind of
Right.
digging up all this stuff.
Mm,
But it gave me some of the tools and some of the awareness to be able to reframe some of those things in a way that long term has been a lot healthier and has given me a bit more self awareness of how those things work and how those things kind of manifest. And
mm.
that's important. I can't recommend therapy enough because it's important because
Yeah.
not only in how it's affected my personal life, but in terms of how I view myself as a dancer.
Mm.
because, having awareness of that, I have a certain mood condition that also contributes to the ways in which I have highs and lows in my self esteem.
Mm.
And actually realizing that those waves are there makes it feel, you still feel everything, but you're just not
Mm.
quite so, it's not so quite so cataclysmic, I don't
Mm.
have to always be like, oh, this is because this is where I'm at in my dancing. Sometimes I do just
Mm.
have to be like, hey, this is actually just how I'm feeling today, and it
Mm.
doesn't, doing those things like with therapy, it doesn't teach you how to always calm the waves, but it teaches you how to surf the waves better,
Oh yeah, yeah,
rather
yeah,
than having the waves hit you and just knock you on your back. And you still have those highs and lows,
yeah,
but you become a little bit better at surfing them,
yeah, yeah, for
basically.
sure. I love our analogy so far. We've had surfing,
Yeah, well,
we've
that's a
had
good one,
waiting
Zach.
rooms,
Some
like
crackers.
but no, but like I totally agree. It's like there's that kind of like I think it's like a quote from like meditation, and it kind of says that um a single wave isn't the entire ocean, and a lot of the time we think of our thoughts as what our mind is and what we
Right.
are. um and it's saying that actually they're separate. Your mind is something that's separate to these individual thoughts that you're having. Our
Yeah.
brain is really good at throwing out these like random like feelings or expressions and being like, hey, this like anxious, anger, oh, happiness. Like it just like it kind of
Yeah.
throws them out constantly, and we're trying to juggle with all of those at some point. But like you said, there's a real refinement that comes from being able to distill those thoughts down, being able to realize and acknowledge that, okay, this is just a thought. It's not
Mm.
me. It's not how I am. It's just the way that I'm perceiving myself right now, or I'm perceiving others right
Yeah.
now. And there's something that's so important about that, because linking it back to dance, you know I was speaking to Dan Canham recently, he's the artistic director of Stillhouse, um, and he was saying that um, he was talking about like, well, we were just generally having a conversation about what are kind of like essences of our practice, like what are the things that like really fuel our practice, and even like fuel our like performances when we choreograph and create.
Mm.
um and we both kind of agreed and said that there's something about like human expression and giving space to human expression, but not only just giving it space, but allowing and facilitating for other people to be privy to that human expression, which is so beautiful,
Mm.
as a moment, or like as a piece. Allowing an audience to see how someone is choosing to express a certain sentiment through movement only, I think is so beautiful, and it's such a wonderful kind of creative task that we as movement artists delve into quite
Mm.
regularly. How do we portray this emotion? And I think what comes with that is this, um, sometimes a necessity to understand yourself, and to understand and allow the dancers that you're working with to understand themselves, to be
Mm.
human in the rehearsal room, to kind of go, actually, today I'm not having such a great day, and to be transparent about that. Actually, there's some stuff going on outside of the studio. Because I don't know about you, but when I was training, I always got taught like, leave your baggage at the door. You're in the studio. That's it. I don't know why I turned into like Ross Kemp, but like I did, and it sounds like I got trained to dance by Ross Kemp, but this isn't even a very good Ross Kemp impression.
Dropping
But
Jimmy 20.
yeah, but there was this feeling of like, um, you leave your baggage at the door, you leave your feelings, you come in, you dance. That is your only job, and once you
Yeah.
leave the studio, you pick that back up again. And it's taken me a really long time to be like, actually, no, I don't. I don't think that that's real. How can you dance
Right.
authentically and get expression across authentically if you've got all this other stuff that you haven't acknowledged in the rehearsal room?
Yeah.
Like, there's no way that a person can express authentic emotion through their body if they've got all these other feelings and thoughts that are popping up and pinging about in their head.
Mm,
And one of my things that I really like to do within my process is to just try and make it as human as possible the whole way through, whether I'm creating something, whether I'm in something, like just in my dance practice. I think there's something so important about being human and allowing others to be human as well.
mm,
Um, because ultimately that's what connects us to our audiences or people that are trying to get into this. um,
mm,
they won't necessarily be able to connect to something that is alienating, because maybe it's either demonized, or pedestaled. If something is so amazing, it's like, wow, that's amazing, but I don't know how to do that, so I'm just gonna say that that's amazing, and I don't really get anything from it, which
mm.
is, I think what sometimes a lot of people think when you were saying earlier when you're at a party, you're like, yeah, I'm a professional dancer. But some people are like, whoa, oh my god, like show me this. Oh my god, what's your best move? And they're engaged, but also they're like, I could never do that. But there's such a big part of dance which is social, and it's about connecting to each other. I don't want to be pedestaled or be put on a pedestal or pedestal others. I want to be able to connect to them on a human level. And I think there's so much of that which is like, it needs to be embedded a little bit more within like dance practices and the dance industry. And I feel like some places are starting to pick up on that, but it's something that I've learned from therapy essentially.
Wow.
um that
And
that
so and
mm,
so it's I mean you're just describing also a way in which how do we get from a process space from the choreographic process, how do we craft that in such a way that it invites honesty and kind of a
mm,
certain amount of transparency,
mm,
um and humanity, and how the way in by having that in the process that eventually is visible in the outcome,
yeah.
visible in the final work,
mm,
because yeah,
I
you
think
can see it. You can see what the dancers are feeling on stage,
exactly,
even
yeah.
when it's they have the neutral contemporary architectural,
mm,
you know resting face.
state,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's like this weird kind of trope of contemporary dance in particular. You
Yeah,
can see. I feel like you can feel how they're relating to the movement, how they're relating to you as an audience member, how they're relating to the other people on the stage. I think
mm,
you feel that in the body language and everything, and
yeah,
sometimes you can watch works and it's incredible, but it can be a bit mechanical in some ways.
yeah.
um
And I think like that's like the thing is like sometimes I think like there is a bit of a fear about being literal or about being human on stage. There is like a little bit sometimes, like I feel like especially with contemporary dance there's this feeling of wanting to abstract or take it to like an abstraction, in a place where it's so like nuanced and it is really juicy and interesting, but sometimes that nuance and that complexity leads to a disconnection
mm,
because I can't see how you got there. If I'm watching from the outside in, there's no way that I could understand that you had these 3 or 4 discussions which led you to this movement stimulus, which led you to change the movement in this way. And I think like having just that human element added into the process means that, well, for me it's almost like a reminder within the process to be like, hey, make sure that people can understand this,
right.
like, you know I can understand my dancers right now and my dancers can understand me. I want the audience to also understand this that's going on between
Mm,
all of us. I want them to understand, not necessarily like see blow by blow what the process was,
Right.
but to get a feeling of that kind of trajectory and that journey, and also that blood, sweat, and tears that has been
Mm.
put into this performance. That makes it sound like I torture my dancers. I do not. but but you know,
As long as I get it right.
got it good. And like
Yeah.
that's the phrase. But like, you know, there's something about seeing dancers being human that I can never get over when I see a dance
Yeah.
performance
And
that's
there's
where
a way in which that is also like a dramaturgical and choreographic choice, right? You know,
mm,
like it's a theatrical choice to say, you know, am I putting characters on stage? Am I putting dancers on
mm,
stage, or am I putting people on
mm,
stage? You know,
yeah,
and that's something that, like, piece to piece, like, often I'm
yeah,
asking the choreographer and trying to clarify, you know, because there's
mm,
some moments I, you know, think about even like Ella's work or my own work where I think there's phrases and sections where it's like we're very clearly like a character, or
mm,
sometimes not even a character, but you know, maybe we're embodying the spirit, or it's the idea of a character even.
mm,
It's, you know, uh or sometimes we're dancers, and then sometimes we're ourselves on stage.
mm,
And all three have their kind of place depending on the kind of effect and
mm,
affect that you're
yeah,
wanting to engender in the audience.
mm,
As well as this thing of, I think that's really interesting in artwork, which is to what degree is the process a part of the artwork
mm,
itself, you
mhm,
know, because, um, you know, stepping away from contemporary dance, but contemporary art is very much a lot of contemporary art. The process is the work, not
mm,
the product.
mm,
You know, it's how you
mm,
got there, which is interesting, you know,
mm,
and sometimes that's the case with contemporary dance as well. And it's this interesting balance to what degree you showcase that,
mm,
and to what degree um, you let the process be visible within the work itself.
mm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
or
no,
to what degree you can say the process was one thing and the product is another, and actually
mm,
people don't need to know my process. I just want them to engage with the final product. And
yeah,
both are valid and interesting, but it's just
mm.
I'm just, you know, teasing that out as like, hey, those are really interesting choreographic choices that you're highlighting there.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. And I think guess this is like also another thing that I should clarify, that like, you know, there is a validity in any of these choices like that we make as creators of
Yeah.
movement, like, you know, of like abstraction or, you know, literality. Um you know, and I think for me personally, I love that feeling. You were talking about this balance of process versus like product. How much of the process do you show compared to the product, or the performance that's shown? And I think there's also a similar kind of balance gauge in my head, um, of like how much of the performer do I want to see, and how much of it is character. And I think that actually there's so much of that which intersects. If for instance, if it is a character, even if it was like a character or, you know, contemporary, you know, neutral state, I still kind of want to see that performer, you know. And I think that it's important for that performer to connect to those two states, because it comes from you. I'm not the one that's going to be on stage, but they're
Mm.
the ones that's going to be on stage. So how do you ground yourself and allow yourself to be you whilst also performing that character? Because
Mm.
there are strings and parallels that you can draw from this character. And this is something that we actually did with like through Rosie K's rehearsals. We've talked a lot, because I'm playing Mercutio, um, and you know, with the dramaturg, one of the first things that we did was talk about our characters, and not necessarily what other versions we've seen of our character, but how do we feel our character fits into this version of the production. And on top of that, what are the parallels that you can draw between this character and you?
Mm.
Because that is what will bring it out, you
Right.
know?
So you can empathize with your character,
Exactly. Yeah, and find a way to portray that, because that portrayal will come from you. It will come from your ideas, your choreographic ideas, as well as a collaboration with the other dancers and the choreographer. So it's best to root the understanding as well in that individual, so they really can take ownership, even when it's like an improvisation. And like, sometimes in the studio, Rosie will be like, do you know what, actually, like, can you like improvise this next little bit of storytelling? Like, what would happen, or how would this character react to this happening? And it then allows you to go, okay, here are the parallels that I can see, this is the understanding that I have of it, because it's kind of rooted in me, as well as like me portraying a character,
right?
which allows me to then improvise a little bit easier and take actions as that character, which is really interesting. And it's something that, I kind of never thought about as much before, because I think I've only ever created pieces where it's been the contemporary dancer state, or, the dancers are themselves.
Yeah.
I've never even thought about kind of like character work and that sort of stuff. And it's something that I started to think
Yeah.
about a little bit more with Rosie's piece, but then also like the movement direction that I've been doing as well. I did some movement direction for The Great Gatsby, which was on at the Wardrobe Theatre in Bristol, and it was a two-woman rendition of the show. So these two performers performed every single character. They flicked
Wow.
between different characters one after
Amazing.
another, and it was amazing to watch. But the movement was so important in that, because
Yeah.
they then needed to embed almost like a little bit of each character within each of their stances that they held. And that was one of the ways that they differentiated between all of them, was they had a different stance,
The
or a
changes in
different,
the physicality.
yeah, exactly, yeah, as well as their voice and their actions. And it was just really interesting to work with that, because it showed the extent to which that is effective. It showed that actually, when someone is playing 12 different characters, if you find that parallel, if you find that link from you to that character, there's so much more that you can draw out of it than just going,
Yeah.
I am playing this character. And then also, what's important is, at the end of the day, making sure you have a way to disconnect from that and
Right.
go, you are not playing that character anymore. Because obviously that can follow you home. And like we've talked about, our brains
Yeah.
already, they like to
Yeah.
solve
Being able
things.
to leave it behind. I think that's so important to have, like, especially in dance, where it's often there's not as much training, like kind of actor training, and how to create a proper space for
Mm.
that. But having like an emotional cool down at the end of the day, not
Oh
just
yeah,
having like a
yeah.
physical like cool down. Because sometimes we've done tasks, or I've done tasks in the past with
Mm,
choreographers that were very emotionally intense. And then we were just
mm.
like, all right, off to lunch. And then it's like, and then you're still like in this place, and
Mm.
like, of
Yeah.
like this intense thing that you've just danced through.
Mm,
And you're like, well, how do we leave that behind? I actually needed like, 5 minutes or 10 minutes to actually,
mm.
how do we exit that?
Yeah.
Um, I think you also bring up a really interesting thing in physicality. How much of a character can actually come out of like the physicality is so
Mm,
amazing. In particular, just like the posturing. Like I think about this even in like relation to accents, for instance. How so much of that
mm,
is just once you have the kind of mouth posture set up, or even the physical posture. Like so much of that embodies the character, and then the voice just comes out of that. It's silly,
mm.
but you even think like the crown, like like all these royals, and everything sounds like this, and
Yeah.
you can hear the tightness and the repression, and everything is so uptight, and you can hear
Yeah.
that, and you see it in the physicality, and but like it comes
Mm.
like out through the voice and everything else, because of how like the physicality itself is so bound up,
Yeah.
you know and that's
Yeah.
why it's kind of great drama, because you just see these people that are so boxed in by You know, the very physicality and manner that you just have these little, you know, statements of
Oh,
drama that just slip out, and you're like,
yeah.
ooh.
It's so funny as well, because like it kind of makes me think of like, you know, like culturally even, like, you know, like for instance with my dad, the
Mm,
way that he speaks Punjabi, which is like the native like tongue that we speak in the household, um he he has a very like essentially he grew up in like the outskirts of Punjab, and it's a very kind of rural accent that he has when he speaks Punjabi. It's a bit rougher.
mm.
um and you're so right about like the accent, and then that also translating into the body, because as well with everything that he does, he is a little bit like rough, and he is a little bit like I don't know, like his sentences and the way he says things are quite short. And so you see that in his actions, like they're portrayed in the same way. He's quite short with like some of his actions, and there's that roughness as well with it. And sometimes that roughness leads to clumsiness, which he then gets more rough about because he's angry that he was clumsy, like,
Mm.
which is really funny. Like, but you know, this is like a subject that I didn't think I was going to talk about, but it kind of reminds me of so I've been playing a lot of Dungeons and Dragons as well.
Yeah.
Uh, and actually, that is something that I found when getting into. So I do voices for all of my different characters.
Dope.
I like to role play all my different characters like in that way. And the thing that I start off with first, before I start off with a name or anything, is the
Mm.
accent. What is the accent that I'm going to go with? And then that kind of informs what that character is like. I think there's
And the
so
good thing
much.
is you can't really get it wrong, because you can't be like,
Yeah.
oh, that's not what an elf sounds like.
Yeah,
An elf doesn't
exactly.
have an heavy Australian accent, deeps.
You're just like, I wish I could do an Australian accent, but oh man, it's
Man, cheeky elves from the outback.
yeah, exactly. Like, I've
Welcome to
got
Mordor. Have yourselves a good time. Oh, that'd be
oh,
amazing.
oh, it would be so great. But like it's that thing of, and it's actually taught me a lot in terms of like performance, like
Right.
playing D&D, like, being able to connect to a character, being able to connect to the motivations of that character, having this accent it's like you said, I feel like um physicality is the accent, or the physical accent of a character.
Mm,
Like the way that you curve your words, or like the way that you say certain things. It's the same with like pedestrian movement. If you have a certain physicality with the way that you portray that, that's almost like the accent that you're putting on top of it
mm,
to give it that tone of, oh, this person has maybe had a bit of a rougher life, or this person is very languish and they're a bit calm with everything that they do. Like, you know, what is the physicality that you put on top of it? And that's one of the things that I think I work with a lot. Like, when I work with movement direction and actors, I start off with dynamics, because it's the thing that can portray that physicality so effectively, because you then have a range, you have a toolbox that you can dip into, like and I learned the
what do you
choreological.
mean by dynamics, for those who might not
Yeah,
be familiar?
so dynamics is how you perform a movement, so not necessarily what you're performing, but how you're doing it. Is it in a sharp manner that you're performing that movement? Is it in a smooth manner? um is there a jaggedness to it? Is there kind of a relaxed kind of, yeah, like languishness to it? These are all kind of dynamics that we can portray within our body, and you can perform the same movement with three different dynamics and see something very different, even though it's the same movement. Um, and I learned through choreological studies. So the dynamics that I know are impact, impulse, rebound, continuous,
Mm.
swing. Um,
Yeah, I remember those from
uh,
LARPing.
yeah, and
Yeah, very useful. Like, well, it's one of the things
yeah.
contemporary dance does really well, is intellectualize, and I would talk about categorize and label things,
Mm,
and I often see these same concepts and ideas and street dance and hip hop and stuff, and people have come up
Mm.
with their own beautiful languages and way, but there's no sort of codified way. And it's one of the things that I
Yeah.
found contemporary dance really training helped me with, was just
Mm.
to talk about dance and movement in general, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Hence the podcast, you know.
Hence the podcast.
This is what this is for. This is just for you, David. This is for no one
Pretty
else, right?
much, yeah.
Yeah. You I'd laugh if you were just like, yeah, I'm gonna release it on Monday. Yeah, sorry, David, I haven't
Yeah.
seen it. Yeah, no, I release it on Monday. I'll do that. I'll
Yeah,
do
it's
that.
out. It's out. Don't
Yeah.
worry about it. It's out. Like,
Yeah,
out
no,
where?
it's
Selling it as a CD out of your back of your truck. Can you
yeah.
imagine that's how I releases? I'm selling like cassette tapes at like a flea market. Like, come get the David Stans podcast with Deepraj Singh.
Yeah.
You're like, is that a cassette tape? I'm like, I also do vinyls.
It's so great. You're just there, like in your garage, like, like pressing these vinyls out of like
Yeah.
each of the
Oh, it's about
episodes.
to make a comeback. Trust me.
Yeah. But no, that would be like,
Wild.
it's so funny, like, but it's so true. Like, talking about dance is something that I really enjoy doing, and analyzing it is something that I really enjoy doing as well. And like you said, it's dance provides a different awareness, or like a specific like body awareness. And I think the more awarenesses you can have of like the way that your body operates, whether that's therapeutically, whether that's like movement based, whether that's like thought process, it's more knowledge that you can use and you can tap into. You can then go, okay, I can categorize this, or I can understand this a little bit better because it has a name. And like I said, with therapy, like a lot of the times, me just being able to name something that I was feeling was like the biggest relief. Because I was like, oh my God, okay, I have a
Yeah.
name for it. I know what that's called now. And it's the same with dance. It's like, oh, I really like this movement, like dynamic, or I like this style of movement. What is that called? And being able to name it actually goes, oh, okay, so that's something that I'm incorporating into my dance, and I didn't know.
It's very
And
like
like you,
Platonic idea. So like the
mm,
Greeks, this is where like our word science comes from. So the Greeks
mm,
believed that to be able to categorize something was to know it. To be able
mm,
to look at two things and put them in, or one thing, and to put into two different categories is to know that thing.
mm.
And our word science comes from eventually the word scienta, which means actually to divide, to separate
Oh
things out.
wow, no way.
Um, so it's this interesting way in which that kind of, that Platonic
Mm,
process of looking at the world and dividing into categories, which we've always done. We ask like the question
mm,
why so many languages uh have make use of the masculine and the feminine, why we refer to
mm,
so many of the features of the world, like the sun and the moon. Different cultures refer to them as male and female, both
mm.
vice versa. For some, like for uh like the Greco-Romans, it was, I think the moon was female. For the Anglo-Saxons and Germanic tribes, the
Mm,
moon was male, and it was the other way around. But
mm.
it's through, because for us these kind of base biological categories,
Yeah.
whether or not you can agree with them or whatever. I know we're in a change at a time of these kind of shifting categories, but
Mm.
just seeing those categories, our own biology became like a reference point through which to understand the rest of the world,
Yeah.
to be able to start to break things up in a way as to just understand them. And so it's
Mm.
kind of why we've ended up with a world that is very, and language that is kind of very gendered, because in many
Yeah.
ways our sex differences were some of the most, when we talk about the development of mankind,
Mm.
were one of the few consistent um categories that we were all seeing all the time. And
Mm.
so we started to just use those categories to try to
Yeah.
make sense of the world.
Mm.
And it's a way in which our biology has and formed the, we've projected our biology onto the cosmos, and
Mm.
used it to kind of make sense of the world in a way.
Yeah, like, and you talk about like the cosmos there and like nature, and I think there's something like so interesting about our connection to nature as well, because I've seen since like obviously lockdown happened, um people have started like moving in nature more, dancing in nature more, like
Yeah.
dancing in like green spaces or finding trees or places where they can ground themselves. um and I think it's so interesting because I never realized, because I've always danced in a studio, I never realized how nice it is to
Hmm.
dance outside, to dance with like the elements in a way, and have that as part of, if I'm improvising, have that as a reaction to something that's happening like environmentally.
Mm.
Um, but there's something really interesting as well with like nature. So I'm at the moment I'm reading I don't know if you're familiar with the School of Life. It's a collective of philosophers and psychologists that essentially talk about like our emotional states and trying to understand our emotions more. And it's headed up by I'm probably going to butcher his name. His name is Alan de Botton. Um, did it with that very southernly the T, not pronouncing the T. It's Botten, but I say Botten. Um, and he essentially, it's called the emotional education or unemotional education. And in the book, he talks about nature and how one of the ways that we can actually understand ourselves is by looking at the wider picture of nature and realizing that, you know, there is this expanse of a world and also a universe, and our troubles may seem so big to us, but when we look at the scale of the universe, we're infinitesimal compared to it. um, and I think that's similar to something like a phenomenon
Mm.
that occurs when I'm dancing outside. I've done a
Wow.
cut. I did some like interesting. Well, I did some videos and recorded them. Like there's a space called the Downs in Bristol, just up like kind of at the top of White Ladies Road, and I've been dancing in the grass and in those fields. And this sounds
Sorry, I just
very this
that's that,
this
what a
sounds
street name. You would only
yeah.
have that in the UK. White Ladies Road. Is
Yeah.
that
Oh,
is
White
that what
Ladies
it
Road.
was
Yeah,
called?
that's
Oh
that's what
my
it's called.
days, that's
Oh,
hilarious.
it's there's a hill called Black Boy Hill. Like it's
Really?
like yeah, it's Black Boy Hill. There's White Ladies Road. Like it's such a freaking, like you said, the categorization like from those days. That's what kind of comes through. But I thought you were laughing at me going, I've been dancing in the fields and in the trees and in the grass, um, but yeah, I've noticed that when I'm dancing outside in nature, there is this feeling of these anxieties and maybe these insecurities or this pent up energy that I've had over lockdown, where I haven't been able to leave my house or I haven't been able to socialize as much. It's such a nice way to let go of that, to
Mm.
kind of allow myself to maybe even sit with it and understand it a little bit more, because I look at my surroundings and I just see how the wide expanse in front of me,
Yeah.
and just how I am one person that's moving in this field right now, and that's all I need to understand, and that's all I need to know. I don't need to try and fix it or work out where that came from. For now, it's just enough to know how I feel,
Mm.
um
To just be
because
in it.
yeah, to just be in it, because I see this, how wide and how open the space is. um and that kind of allows me to go, maybe these issues aren't as big as I'm making them out to be.
Mm.
Maybe these issues can be dealt with, but right now it just feels really big. Because when I
Right.
look out, this is big compared to
Right.
me, you know?
Compared to what
Uh,
we're going
yeah,
through.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
It's
for
almost
sure.
like a, I don't know, like a spiritual kind of epiphany in a way.
Mm,
Um, the Yeah, how small we feel in a good way. How small we feel.
mm, Mm-hmm.
like nature makes us feel, and that it's quite
Mm.
humbling. Is there a way?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, like,
Mm.
you can
Mm.
pass on this question, but I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you if faith had informed your dancing
Mm.
in any way. I've,
Mm.
like, I'm a Christian, and the dance sector is quite secularized, and
Mm-hmm.
um, and there's a difficult history
Yeah.
between Christianity and dance, and between all religions and dance, and that
Mm.
there's often ways in which it tends to either massively embrace it or
Mm.
hugely reject it, and a lot of that primarily has to do with beliefs about the body, about the ways in which the body is presented, about the ways in which the body is used,
Mm.
and I've been kind of, but there's ways in which it's both incredibly like aspirational and both and can be sometimes also restrictive,
Mm.
so uh you, like even like my own kind of beliefs make me conservative about how I present the body on stage, and
Mm.
I'm, for instance, like I'm not even like against nudity, but like I feel like there needs to be a reason for it. There
Mm.
is
Yeah.
certain like body kind of ideas that are informed by that, but also at the same time, like I often, like I recently like a couple years, well, recently a couple years ago, I developed workshops for my church that explored dance as a form of prayer and dance as a form of
Mm.
worship, and we kind
Wow.
of explored these ideas, how we could, through gesture, through the use of gesture, of this idea of gathering and giving something to God or receiving something from God, or
Mm.
using text, and the ways in which, because I just felt that through my dancing, I was like, here is this like massively underutilized resource for
Mm.
people of various faiths that could be utilized, and for some people they might find that they connect to God, not so much through singing
Mm.
or quiet contemplation, though those are perfectly valid. But for some people, it
Mm.
might be through movement that they feel connected to the divine, or yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
interested, are there the ways for you in which
Mm.
you feel that, like, faith is contextualized or informed your dancing, and it might be like no, but yeah.
Do you know what? It's such an interesting question. It's something that I haven't really thought about as much. And I think like as you was talking about it then, and I was kind of like scouring through the recesses of my mind and trying to like see like what kind of connections are there. And I think like the biggest connection between like my faith and my dancing is like the guidance that my faith offers when it
Mm,
comes to um just like the way that you navigate the world. So kind of like Sikhism, it's the youngest of the six like main world religions. It's very like it's seen as like the kind of slightly more rebellious, or like the
mm,
one that's like not as orthodox in terms of the way that it portrays itself, because it came out of the Mughal Raj in India, um, when there was a lot of strife between Muslims and Hindus, but the Mughal Raj, and I want to make this clear, there's a distinction. The Mughal Raj were using Islam as a weapon, but they weren't necessarily using it in the right way,
mm.
as in they shouldn't have been using it as a weapon.
What is the Mugaraj?
The Mughal Raj. So essentially, it's when I think it was. I'm not super like clued up on the history, but it's the Muslim leaders at the time, or the Mughal leaders at the time.
Oh,
Uh,
Mughal plus Raj
yeah,
King.
Mughal. Yeah, um, they essentially were trying to take over India,
Hmm.
and conquer different parts of India. And one of the ways that they were doing that was using and weaponizing Islam, and forcibly converting people. So Sikhism was kind of born out of that confrontation,
Mm.
as a way. And also it was born out of the caste system, that was, like running, quite a lot of creating quite a lot of dilemmas at the time, um, within Hinduism.
Mm.
So it came out of that confrontation and was essentially looking at humility. Sikhism talks about kind of equality as well,
Mm.
like making sure that everybody feels equal, and also kind of like moral justice.
Mm.
Um, Again, making sure that whatever you do and however you act, you are acting in like a morally justified way. And for instance, one of the things that we believe is that no one should be persecuted for their way of life
Mm.
unless that person is harming other people. And that's the only time when somebody should intervene. If that person's way of life is harming other people,
Mm.
then that their way of life needs to be reassessed and we should intervene.
Mm.
So it's kind of that kind of sense of humility and equality, and moral justice as well. I think is something that is embedded quite deeply into my practice on a very subliminal level, because I've grown up, you know, as a Sikh.
Mm.
And I think the moral side of things especially plays into my dance pieces, because I think about I think quite deeply about the way that other people will feel when they see my dance piece, or like when they see some
Mm.
choreography that I do. I think about, you know, how am I leaving this audience is a big
Mm.
question for me always. Am I leaving them in a place where it's actually quite uncomfortable for them?
Yeah.
Um, or am I leaving them in a place where, it's uncomfortable, they can analyze the information and they can understand it, and they're not left in a place of like trauma or being triggered? And I know like there's a certain degree to which you can kind of, safeguard a performance
Yeah.
and give it that seal of like approval, and me like, okay, I don't want to trigger people if they've had this, or if they've been through this. But and there's only so far that you can go with that, because
Yeah,
obviously
of
people
course.
will bring their own stuff to a performance, and you can't protect everyone from what they're going to view. But for the most part, I do try to understand what it might bring out in certain people.
Mm.
And it was actually a really interesting thing that I saw at the Bristol Old Vic when I went to watch a show once. And the show was looking at suicide, quite like deep traumas,
Mm.
for the main characters. And they made this announcement at the beginning of the show saying, these are the things or the subjects that the show is delving into. Uh, and then they made some like statements, which I thought was really interesting. I don't know if it was um, like the perfect way to deal with this, but it was interesting to hear them. And one of the statements was, you don't have to stay here in the audience if you don't want to. Don't feel this as an obligation. Once you have sat down, you have to
Mm.
see it through. If you feel like something has triggered an emotional response in you, and you actually want to be alone, or you want to leave the space, feel free to leave the space. Also, they brought in a counselor, or a psychotherapist,
Wow.
um, who talked about this. And they made these statements at the beginning of the show. And
Mm.
she was like, I'm going to be out in the foyer afterwards. If anybody does want to speak to me about anything that came up for them,
Mm.
feel free to come and talk to me.
That's really
Um,
great because it's creating a context in which, like, hey, we want to talk about these issues. It's important that we talk about these issues
mm,
and make work about these things. But
yeah.
also, how can we, put things in place in which we can also make that a healthy and, hopefully
Mm,
ultimately positive conversation for people as well.
yeah. And it's, I think it was, again, like I said, like, like there are things that I can see with that which might lead to certain like issues or problems, like not even like emotionally, but more logistically.
Right.
Um, but I think that that's a really nice nod or a step in the right direction for how can we take care of our audiences, not feel like we have to leave them in this place of like,
Mm.
oh my god, the world is ending and nothing is good and we are always like
Yeah.
evil people. Like
Everyone's leaving just in despair.
like, and some issues call for that, but I think as well there's a lot of understanding that can come from understanding your audience's position and
Mm.
where they're coming from. And
Yeah.
again, this is something that I've
Having an
learned to do.
awareness of who you're making work for, in a way.
Exactly, yeah. Like, but also having not only having an awareness of who you're making the work for, but understanding that like people are coming from different backgrounds. People
Mm.
are, might see things in certain ways, um, and coming from a place of understanding rather than presenting and reactionary, I think can lead to more fruitful conversations, essentially.
Yeah.
Um, because then that person feels like, they might not notice, but they essentially can feel acknowledged in a certain way, like subliminally, and be like, oh, okay, like this. Maybe they might notice like some of the smaller details in the piece, and I think that's something that dancers, movement artists are really good at. We look at like the bigger movements, but we also look at like the tiny gestures
Mm.
that people do. What do those tiny gestures say? Why do they say that? Why does that person do that to this person, or why do they do that to themselves? And I think those are the moments, because I call them human moments in my pieces,
Yeah.
where in amongst the dancing you'll have these moments which are very pedestrian and very human.
Mm.
Because I want I
We
want
had a
the
conversation with Richard Chappell like a couple of podcasts ago, and he talked
mm,
about we had a similar conversation about that, where it was like, yeah, how do we have these human moments that are then contextualized by dance, in which dance
mm,
is part of the connective tissue between those
oh
moments, you know.
yeah.
Um, I'm just conscious of the time.
Yes.
Yeah, I gotta wrap up, but like this has been
Mm,
such an amazing conversation. Thank you so
yeah,
much for coming on and
yeah.
sharing with us. Where can people find out about the show, about
Yes.
Rosie's show?
So if you type in Rosie K, Romeo and Juliet, it should be the first or second link on Google. There's
Do you
also
know
a
when you
link.
guys are on tour?
So we are performing at the Birmingham Hippodrome at the moment. The date is set, and I've got my fingers crossed for the 8th of September for a
8th of
live show at
September. Awesome.
8th of September, Birmingham Hippodrome. And then I think there are further dates down the line, but those
Mm-hmm.
haven't been completely solidified yet because of venues and everything reopening.
Sure.
But 8th of September at the moment, I think there's 2 or 3 performances potentially that we're doing.
Nice.
Um,
And for yourself, the best place to find you is
for
Instagram.
yeah, Instagram is the best place to find me. Which is funny. I never would have thought I would like quote a social media platform as the best place to find me
Yeah.
professionally, but here we are. Yeah, so it's how deep is your Raj, is my Instagram handle, all one word.
Such
And
a dope
yes,
handle.
yeah, and you are correct, that is coming
I'm
from the
looking
Bee
forward to the
Gees.
t-shirts, man. The How Deep Is Your Raj t-shirts. Those are you're gonna,
Yeah, yeah, those are gonna sell. Those will go well with your vinyls,
yeah,
David.
exactly.
Yeah.
My vitals of this podcast. Oh, that's so good. I love it. I love it. We're gonna drop all of that in the description below, so people can click through, check out Rosie K's Romeo and Juliet that you're in.
Mm,
That I'm sure is gonna be amazing. I can't wait to see it.
mm,
I've seen a couple of other of her works, and she's a fantastic choreographer.
mm,
And I'm excited to see you in it. Check out
yeah.
what Deep's up to. We'll put it all below. And yeah, thank you, audience. And thank you, Deeps, for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for listening to my ramblings. It's been great. I've really enjoyed myself, and thank you for a dope conversation.